All right. Excellent. Very good. Very good. Quick. Speedy McDraw there. Got it? All right, let's do the next one. This is going to be easy. You guys are pretty technical. This is easy stuff. The first one is asking, oh, I redrew these slides. I just realized now. All right, I redrew these slides and it's covering up what it's asking you to do. Because when I copied and pasted these slides from the old template, the fonts and everything all changed all over the place. And the box is now covering up. Let's just jump straight to the, here, I'll just jump straight to the answer. So I just realized that the boxes are on there were supposed to actually be slid over so that this part's exposed, but it didn't do that. So the first one is pretty straightforward. It's plug and chug in the formulas. We don't need to talk about that very long. Utilization here. And probability that the system's empty, right? So these are inverses of each other. These are the inverse of each other, right? Utilization's a big deal. We're interested in how much use we're getting out of this facility. If we buy a bus, if we buy a locomotive engine, if we buy rolling stock, we would be interested in utilization. We want to know how much we're getting out of that facility. If we install a new platform track at a station, we would be very interested in utilization. Are we getting the full use of that resource? On the other hand, this number here, the probability that the system is empty, is a customer service parameter. It's the probability that the customer or the entity that needs to use that resource will find it available. So this is a trade-off, right? You see this trade-off right now. We haven't even done any heavy math, and already we know there's a trade-off. The more utilization we get out of the resource, the more likely or unlikely that the customer is going to have the resource available to them when they want it. This is an unresolvable problem. You will always have a trade-off between fully utilizing the resource and providing friendly, instant, prompt customer service.
So this is kind of a margin?
A margin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a direct inverse. It adds up.
Yeah.
I mean, it adds up to 1. In this particular case, you have a direct trade-off. More utilization means more difficulty for the customer. Now, we can manipulate this system. We can do some things to improve this. And we aren't going to spend the time to do it today. But if you look at some of these formulas that I'm not talking about, the multi-server, the multi-resource formulas, if you were to spend some time manipulating those, you would discover that if you increase the number of resources, this guy here, if you increase that, and you increase the arrival rate proportionally, the system still gets better. That is, if I have, with the arrival rate lambda, this system still performs better.
Isn't it the same? Just double?
It is the system doubled. It is twice as many servers and twice as many customers.
But what about
In a railway discussion, this is 1 track block, 1 train per hour. 2 trains per hour, 2 track blocks, 2 parallel track blocks. And that's assuming these are random. This is a Poisson process, so we don't have a schedule.
what about if you increase the lambda and don't change the...
Then the service gets worse. Because this formula, you increase lambda and you leave mu the same, and this number gets higher, and this number gets lower, and you're making service worse. You're making service worse. But the point is, twice as many customers, twice as many demands double the service. So the ratio between service and demand is the same. That initial utilization number, lambda over mu, is the same. But this is not the same. This changes dramatically. Smaller, it gets smaller. And this is, we won't take the time to get into this in detail today, but this is a fundamental factor that explains why economies of scale matter. Big enterprises that can pool large amounts of resources together and pool large amount of customers together can provide a better level of service at a higher level of utilization than small enterprises. And that's a huge reason why giants like Walmart can do what they do. Or Bilka, or some other really huge discount store in Europe. The bigger the scale, the more economy efficiencies you have. Last thing before I send you off into doing more exercises on your own, and do this, we'll do one more slide, and then I'm going to take a coffee break and have you do some exercises on your own. Why Poisson process? Why, that is, does anyone doubt that these formulas and these assumptions are relevant to a wide variety of situations? Does anyone doubt that the Poisson process is really a reasonable, generic process to assume that things will follow in the absence of any other information?
Well, yeah, because of the independency of the memory loss.
Yeah, that's a great thing, and I'm all for it. I'm glad it does that. It's great, but I mean, like if you look outside, you go to the cafeteria, you go to Lyngby and shop or whatever, or you ride the train or the bus or whatever. Any thought in your mind about whether, Poisson process, does this make sense? Should I, why am I using Poisson process as my baseline assumption about how a system behaves, about the arrival pattern of the customers and about the service pattern? Why would I make that assumption?
But in the Poisson process, it does not consider that the service time can have a lower limit. It could be 0.
It could be 0,
And
yes.
it is not pretty
That is not so much. That is not so much. So that's a little bit of a limitation. Ursa? Okay. Christine? Sorry? Oh, just reaching for the sky. All right. I had some of these similar thoughts in my mind. Certainly, there are lots of things that you can say, wait a minute, this is not a Poisson process. Transportation, you can say there's a minimum trip time between these two stations. It doesn't go to 0. There are all kinds of things you can look at and say, this does not follow that process. But when you're looking at something clean slate and you have no other information and you're just starting from the beginning, there are a lot of good reasons Poisson process is an immediate assumption is correct. And I'll give you an example that I have worked out in my head that convinces me that this is the foundation of truth for so many things. I have a flow. There's a decision in that flow. And it's a flip of the coin. It's some percent yes, some percent no. Bang, bang. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. I start out with a flow that is completely deterministic, completely constant. They are completely in sync. They are leaving in march step. This is a military team, and they have saluted, and they are marching out the door exactly, completely on time, exactly perfect. And they get to the decision process. And the decision is, Breakfast. Do you want your eggs scrambled or sunny side up? This is serious business. No soldier begins his day without a good breakfast. There's some percentage that want scrambled and some percentage want sunny side up. It's going to be random. There's nothing about the pattern, the sequence of these soldiers that's going to tell you which one wants scrambled and which one wants sunny side up. So it's a percent flip of the coin as they get up to the decision point here. When they make that decision, there is a time interval between each decision, and there is a random probability that they go each route. And now suddenly, we have some even integer number of time intervals separating the people on either route. And it is a random number. And if you take this as the limit of time going to the smallest value to limit to 0, this becomes an exponential distribution. Think of how many things you know that if you start the clock, you wind up the toy, and you let it go, and no matter how perfectly you organized it, no matter how perfectly you line up the cars at the stoplight, and the stoplight turns green, and the cars are evenly spaced going through the intersection, how many different things are those cars going to do that have some random decision that's going to cause them to go one way or the other? And as you follow those flows, and they do that a couple of different times, eventually that flow is going to be a Poisson process. Even though you started with a perfectly discrete, perfectly deterministic, evenly spaced process. So there are all kinds of things in the real world where this Poisson process assumption is perfectly accurate. There may be some bounds, there may be some external conditions, there may be some bounding to this, but if you let things roll and you follow that chain of events, the further and further down the chain of events you go, unless there's something correcting for the process as you go, it's an exponential distribution, it's a Poisson process. And it's just mathematically obvious. It's just simple decision is the definition of a Poisson process. So, last slide, and then we'll stop for exercise. So this is a pretty easy formula, and I just want to quickly point out some of the things that are typically make mistake on this kind of formula. So typical mistakes in this formula, this only applies to MM1. We don't have a formula like this for MD1. Kind of annoying. You'd think the easier Q would be the easier one to model, and it's not true. The MM1 we can get all kinds of formulas for because things drop out when you're doing the math and you're deriving the formulas. The ugly stuff ends up canceling itself out. When you do MD1, the ugly stuff doesn't cancel out. And a lot of the solutions to the values for MD1 formulas are these really ugly recurring formulas that have alternating sequences of positive and negative values that go to infinity. And so if you're trying to calculate, if you really dig deep into an MD1Q and look at the formulas, it ends up being a summation of a whole bunch of values that swing like this on the graph, positive and negative infinity, and they cancel each other out as you go down the chain. Anyway, so this is the probability of the number of things in the system. If we were at a hump yard or some kind of a platform track or something like that, or station, we would be saying what is the probability of some number of trains in the station or something like that. And this is in the system. This is an MM1Q. So how many cars in the queue? 13% probability that there are how many cars in the queue? How many? So this is the probability that there are more than 4 cars in the system. What is the system? What is the system? What defines the system? Ursa?
The cars that are on queue, so waiting, and the cars that are being serviced.
Yeah.
Or like
Yeah.
somewhere lost in the system maybe.
No, it's exactly what you said.
Okay.
It's exactly what you said. The queue plus the service. This is an MM1 queue. How many things are in service? One. It only has one server. It has one slot. It has one resource. So there's one thing in service. Everything else is in the queue. So this is the probability that there are more than 4 things in the system. The probability that there are more than 3 things in the queue. 3 things in the queue. And then the rest of it just follows that pattern right there. So we're going to take our coffee break and also give you 10 minutes or so to do what I have asked you to do on the exercise sheet. So what have I asked you to do? I've asked you to repeat some of these calculations for the MD1 queue. Take the same numbers off these slides and do the MD1 queue. And then this is going to take you a little bit more time. This may take you maybe like a 15-minute break. Make a curve. Take a spreadsheet, take this formula, and generate the curves for some of these performance parameters over a range of utilizations, over a range of ratios between lambda and mu. Because I'd like you to see the curve. I'd like you to see the performance curve of these systems. So coffee break. We'll take maybe 15